Welcome, everybody. I've got my good friend Dave Zed, who's quickly becoming one of my really good friends. We talk all the time now. And it just so happens that our works overlap. Now, Dave is far and beyond uh, incredible at taking taking what he does and taking what I do and translating it into academia. And when I say that, I mean that PhDs and people with physics understandings um, can explain. It's incredible how it translates from one to another. So, Dave, I wanted to ask you real quick: what are you comfortable sharing with everybody about what it is that we plan on doing together? What is it that you could tell your audience and my audience?
Sure. Well, first off, let me just say I'm again, as always, brother. I'm super grateful and extremely humbled that you introduced me in the way that you did. But if I may say as well, to reciprocate that favor and not just and the compliment in a genuine way. Before I answer your question, there, this speaks to, I guess you could say, the symbiotic, for lack of a better term, relationship that Micah and I have. I can help I guess perhaps convey it to a certain group of people, whereas Micah can convey it to a whole other group of individuals that I simply just don't have the ability to do so. And that is where our work intertwines substantially. So, actually, as a matter of fact, I'll just keep going on because this will answer your question.
Yeah.
Basically, Micah and I are, in addition to essentially not limiting ourselves, looking to make presentations and already are in the works of doing so, providing presentations to small bodies of individuals, whether it is world governments, literally from all around the world, or whether it is private, individuals that are simply looking for consulting and understanding, whether it is in business, whether it is in you name it, their personal, I guess you could say, life dilemmas, if you will, and not so much in a way of, I guess you could say, telling people we have all the answers, we know what's wrong with you, or we know what's wrong with this business deal or something like this, but by providing insight that our ancestors have constantly been trying to tell us, that Micah's done so eloquently in presenting. They've been trying to tell us over and over again. What's that saying you have, Micah, about, where now we take it literally?
Yeah, so it's John Dominic Cressant, and he says, it's not that the ancient people told literal stories and we're now smart enough to take them symbolically. It's that they always told them symbolically, and we are just now becoming dumb enough to take them literally.
And with that said, I couldn't agree more. So to simplify it, there are people in every aspect, not just any, but in every aspect of life and in every business, every industry, that are looking to find more and more of the personal truths to them, but by providing them with the information with a percentage on my end and a percentage on Micah's end, by definition, one not being able to do without the other because of Micah's great presentations, it can help these individuals essentially get to that next level, if you will, by understanding that. Let's give a literal example. When
Yes.
Micah came on and gave a presentation about how, which is on our YouTube publicly now on Gen Z, and I believe on Micah's channel as well, how you put so eloquently, in my opinion, that we may be, in fact, perhaps God, or a fractal or a source of God experiencing itself, or the
Mhm.
universe experiencing itself.
Mhm.
It then reminded me of this idea of, for example, uh, a spiral or a vortex, or the way in which people talk about this infinite realm of experience, like my good friend Alexei Novitsky does from Lucius Labs, this infinite realm of constant reoccurrence with respects to not ascending in the reoccurrence. And I say that carefully, but just to give people a mental idea, not
Mhm.
getting to that next level until they understand the, for lack of a better term, the dissolvement of ego, if you will. And Micah's done a freaking phenomenal job of that, in my opinion, because it's like when people talk about we are the universe experiencing itself. Well, it's like a leaf falling off of a tree or a tree branch. The leaf will go into the soil, back into the earth, and then, make its way, I'm oversimplifying, but make its way back into the natural process cycle of Mother Nature. But if the leaf perhaps is damaged by something inorganic or something non-natural or something like this, the leaf is going to have a far more difficult time getting back to its root source and therefore back to the tree in which it once came from.
Mhm.
Now imagine that leaf being all of us individually, constantly going through that cycle, and Micah's done an absolutely phenomenal job of presenting that, which is why there have been people in correspondence with what we're doing at SALT that have in fact reached out. That, again, I have to be careful there's a certain line we both can't cross, obviously, at this point, but in terms of presenting to certain groups of individuals that are genuinely looking for a better understanding of their business, a better understanding of their life, but to understand that is to first understand themselves, because then by doing so they can apply that in every way, shape, and form. And Micah does a beautiful, a tremendous job of conveying that in a way that sometimes I take way too long to ramble onto. So we have this sort of agreement, Micah and I, where I'll stick with the academics. Micah will stick with the, laying it out to the average person, even, to the average business person or what have you. And I don't mean to keep orienting it to that of, business. This can apply to anyone and everyone that is inquiring, but it is definitely, hopefully I explained that well enough.
No, you absolutely have. See, I dabble in quantum physics. In our last discussion, I kind of showed you my breadth of knowledge for that, but it's nowhere near yours. But regardless, I do dabble in quantum physics a little bit. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but about 20 years ago, when string theory and M theory and F theory, I don't even know if F theory materialized. I heard that it was rumbling that it could have. I don't know what ended up happening with it, but I do know that, this is 20 years ago. That was cutting edge. Well, Hermes was talking about this 5,000, 6,000 years ago, the third principle, Hermetic principle in the Quantum Hermetica. Hermes Trismegistus, or Thoth, as you want to call him.
Micah, you do a great job, man, of literally saying to, and I'm pretending as if we have an audience in front of us right now.
Right.
Literally, that is you are able to come out and say, look at the data points, the patterns have been there. And then if someone says, say, for example, when Mike and I are presenting to, in a boardroom or something like this, and someone goes, they get skeptical, and rightfully so. They go, oh, that's BS. Well, that's when I come in and I say, well, okay, bring in your best PhD or bring in your best whomever. And then that's when I sort of put the icing on the cake in that regard. This is to your point, man. This is exactly the repeating of the same underlying energy. Now, albeit it is possible in this physical reality, in my opinion, to access this energy in a multitude of different ways, but it's tapping the same underlying energy nonetheless. And Micah's done a very good job of explaining that, whether it's with his books or whether that's with his whether that's with his videos and his presentations that he's done on our end and elsewhere, because you show that, in my opinion, it is the same reoccurring spiral or clock, just at different increments.
Right, absolutely. And I tell people this all the time. People are like, he's just a fiction writer or this, that, and the other thing. And to be a fiction writer is a really cool thing. To have a book deal is a cool thing. To have a book deal 9 books deep or 10 books deep is an even cooler thing. But I got a little upset when someone said that to me. And then I thought to myself, I was like, you know what? I studied all the greats. I studied Aldous Huxley. I studied Philip K. Dick, your Minority Report. I studied Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I studied Orwell, 1984. Animal Farm. I studied Catch-22. I studied everything. Okay. I have a bachelor's in English. My focus is language, literature, and criticism. And that's literally what I'm doing. And so all I did was I applied my education to write these stories. And I always tell people to get the books, and so there's a financial interest for me. Sure, there is. But to be honest with you, all the stuff that I'm doing in the videos, all the interviews that I'm doing, these are all in the books. And this is a way, when you write fiction, to reach the masses. Okay. Whereas there are people like Jordan Maxwell or Santos Bonacci, Bill Donahue. There's all these names, and I know all of them in astrotheology. Okay. I know all these people, or I knew them if they were still alive. But I approach it a different way. This is how you teach it to the masses. Okay. Yes, they're fiction stories. Yes, there's a financial incentive. but nobody's written an astrotheology series, you know. And my to my point with the string theory, that was 20 years ago. But Dave, what is it now? The universe is conscious. That's cutting edge right now. Well, welcome to the club. Everyone's going to figure this out eventually, which brings me back to what
Well,
is God.
I couldn't agree, dude. I couldn't agree more. And you literally took the words out of my mouth there. I mean, people, to your point of what, saying with respects to, not to harp on this, but with respects to even criticism in general. Well, people could say, people could make the argument, I'm just spitballing here, that, oh, Dave, sudden you're stumbling upon this in the last year, give or take. This is something's being put into your head or downloaded or something of this type. Well, I would say it's very possible. Who am I to say no? As a matter of fact, I mean, and I want to be very clear, I am nowhere near such a level, but there were individuals like, for example, Nikola Tesla and others that had claimed, even Philip K. Dick and Aldous Huxley, if I'm not mistaken, that when they were working on their particular line of work or their passion, they were receiving what you could call downloads, or channeling, you name it. So the question then becomes, I mean, not in a negative sense, but again, it goes back to this idea of, are we perhaps containers that are senders and receivers of
100%.
the
Dave, what you'll do,
positive?
Dave, the interesting thing, what you'll do when you go through history, okay? And if you've ever tried to do this, look for like the air conditioner or the steamboat or the coffee maker. Look at the patents for them. You will find more often than not that shit was invented by 5 or 6 people at the same time and they fought for a patent. We are all accessing the same knowledge. Einstein used to say that when he would think on a subject, nothing would come to him. He said he had to clear his mind and then it would just download. And through my work, I tell people there's things that you can do that can help you access this, whatever you want to call it, better. You got to quit alcohol. Okay. You got to quit masturbation. Okay. And again, I'm not trying to take your dick out of your hand. If you want to whack away, knock yourself out. But when you do that, it allows your chrism to rise. It's called the Christ. It rises up and then it lands in your brain and then in your pineal gland, and that's how you raise your vibration. Watch a candle. I tell people to look at a candle burn, preferably a non-scented one, because the scented one is going to take your focus away. But if you watch just a flame, okay, this is why our ancestors, we have evolved. With us too, everybody likes to sit by a bonfire and just watch the fire. Your blood pressure goes down, your heart rate goes down. You enter, I'm not sure which level state. It might not delta waves. I forget which wave it is when you're just calm.
I don't even know I forgot myself, to be honest with you. Yeah.
I think it might be beta waves, whatever it is, but it lowers you. It lowers you into a different state. Okay. And that's what I basically teach people. And I just try and show people, look, there's a lot of information out there, and the one thing I wanted to bring up that I want to tell you guys early, because Dave has a much larger channel than mine. Although mine is growing, which is great. But I wanted to share this with both of you guys. Okay, you have to understand is that if our works are going to blow up publicly, okay, if publicly our works are going to blow up, we're in the conspiracy community too, Dave. Okay, so we know how this goes. When you reach a certain level, suddenly you become controlled op, right? That's usually how it is. You go down the rabbit hole deep enough, anybody's controlled op. There's a story for everyone on how they're controlled op. People are going to be checking all the.
Well, then it becomes to your point. It gets to the point of where, in my humble perspective as well, to your point of, to what extent is it this idea of an archetypal influence? But putting that to the side, to someone had I was asked many months ago, don't you feel, for example, with some of the things you're attempting to pursue, particularly in the defense community, that you're being used or something like this with respects to again trying to land contracts and all of that? Well, look, I've stated my objective very transparently and as clear as I can be, which is that I know it's a long shot. And call me crazy, and maybe I am, sure, but I am attempting to provide some form of benevolent correspondence with the presentations Micah and myself do for private groups and what have you, to attempt to provide a form of at least benevolent balance within
Right.
that world. And I know that's a long shot, but at the
Right.
same time, sometimes it takes like the the crazy ones to give it a shot. Now,
Right.
with that said as well, it speaks ultimately to this idea too of, ultimately, and I don't mean this glass half full nor glass half empty. I think it's actually something for people to ponder on, um, which is, aren't to some extent, aren't we all being used? I mean, at the end of the day, even my picking up my phone right now, for example, to check social media or check some messages, I am then feeding data back to, I have an iPhone, in this case Apple. Is that not a form of being used? Absolutely
Mhm.
it is. The question is, in my opinion, to what extent are we conscious of it? In my
Right.
opinion, ultimately, everyone, and sure, everyone can, people can take this as they see fit, truly, everyone's a hypocrite, including myself, including everybody. The question is, to what extent are we conscious of such? And are we willing to try and make small moves forward in order
Right.
to effectuate a larger ripple in the long run?
Right. Well, you do have to understand too is that anytime you take a job, you're being used. Okay. They've traded salary for your work. It's a mutual using. Okay.
Right.
Um, in the most positive way, I'm leaning on Dave and using him to translate what I've done, and he's using me to easily explain it to the masses. So
It
we have a mutual using here, but it's to be aware of it is the thing.
right.
Now there is something I wanted to talk about real quick because I don't know if you guys know this, but you guys know that at the top of everything is evil and satanic, and I've gone over what Satan is. I've gone over what Lucifer is. I've gone over what Baphomet is. I've gone over what the um, the pentagram is. I've gone over all this stuff and I demystified all of it. Okay, but at the top they say it's very evil, but that's not the truth. There is a group of people, okay, who sit at the very, very top who control the flow of information for humanity. Okay. It is made up of good people. It is made up of righteous, good people, politicians, some celebrities. Not all celebrities and politicians are evil. Okay. These are public figures, some not public figures. Okay. I want you guys to do a little research. It's called the light system. Okay. And the light system is a group of people that manages how humanity moves forward. Because I've made this point before, Dave, is that we can only move as a society as fast as the dumbest motherfucker who's holding us back. We literally have to drag him, and that's how we move. We can't go to the stars. And when you start talking about things like free energy and stuff, and I mentioned the Kardashev scale to you the other day, Michio Kaku talks about it too. Type 1 civilization or type 0, I forget. I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but I think a type 0 civilization gets their energy from the earth, from the oil, from the gold, from whatever you want to call it. A type 1 gets it from their star. A type 2 gets it from the galaxy. Okay. And then a type 3, I forget what it is, but you can look up the Kardashev scale if you'd like.
Right.
My
Right.
my simple point about this is that free energy, okay? I think that could bypass the whole system. Okay. If you do not need to, and I in my first book, I wrote a story at the very end of my first book where a guy finds an article because I saw this. It happened in Colorado 10 years ago, literally, because my first book came out. Well, it didn't come out 10 years ago. It came out a few years ago, but I wrote it 10 years ago when I was 28. And there was a story about how this company found a way to take the sun and then take water. I forget if it was ocean water or if it was just water, but what it does is they use the sun's energy and they separate the hydrogen and the oxygen and they turn the hydrogen into clean fuel. And then the oxygen just goes back out into the ether. Okay. Now, I haven't heard anything more of that. Okay. But that has come out. Okay. That's type 1 shit. That's type civilization, type 1 stuff. That's using the sun instead of whatever you have on your planet. That's using the sun. Free energy, you wouldn't even need to drain the galaxy of its energy. You wouldn't even need to.
I couldn't agree more, because it is like sort of when chains are interlocked together, because there's so many relying on the other. When one is, for example, resting, if you will, then the other chain picks up the work, and then that one, the other one kinked to that one or linked up to that one picks up the other. And again, similar or maybe perhaps identical to a harmonic oscillator, going back to this idea of fractals, micro, macro, zoom in, zoom out. It's that same idea of the self-reliant system, whether it's perhaps a planet, whether it is our bodies, perhaps, whether it is even the universe itself, the cosmos. And then even beyond that, in an archetypal sense, or perhaps even a scaling outside of the reality of a certain layer of one universe, or again, going to this idea of it never ending, but then eventually realizing that this form of whether experience or pursuit may in fact lead back to where you initially started, which speaks to the idea of, again, the joy is in the journey, the more philosophical, ontological side, right? Where what you are pursuing in and of itself is in fact the experience in which you learn and obtain things, instead of actually just for example, let's say, and this is no disrespect to anyone with the traditional academic education, but instead of just going to universities to study, say, quantum physics for a degree, right? Because I will say that I've spoken to many PhDs, and of which I have respect for all of them, but there were a couple of them that behind the scenes started trying to take some jabs at me and saying, well, you don't have a degree, this or that, and I hate to be like this, but essentially just by being myself, for lack of a better term, I guess you could say, laid the laws of the land down, in terms of, I said to them, okay, well, define for me what a virtual particle is, if you will. And they were only able to take it to up to a particular point, because they couldn't, after that, the degree in which they were working towards was then achieved. So there was no need to pursue it any longer. Well, right. I think that the pursuit never ends.
No, maybe it doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't.
Right.
And I know that when they teach mathematics at a master's level, I think one of the courses, or the ending course, I think, is imaginary numbers. Right. So I think that's a section of that too.
Yep. It speaks to this idea of, again, they call it complex, they call it imaginary, they call it non-observable, anything and everything to essentially say, that, for example, what we call our imagination, or what people would say is, fiction, as a matter of fact, in my opinion, is not fiction. I mean, I'm making a leap here with respects to not substantiating it scientifically or mathematically in real time, but I would make a very strong argument that what we call our imagination is, a matter of fact, something or an event or an outcome that has simply not occurred within this local reality, but has in other ones, if you will, which speaks to this idea that, perhaps let's say science fiction in Hollywood may not be science fiction. It may in fact be various forms of outcomes in various realities stemming from us as the source. And then,
if you're talking about the infinite multiverse or the universe, it's literally almost a guarantee that something has to exist.
This would be, as a matter of fact, to what you just said there, I would encourage people to look up what's called the Kaluza-Klein theory. And that goes into that exactly, where essentially, and I not to go off on a tangent here, but this idea, and I bring this up quite often to our Patreon members, that this idea of constantly pursuing the thing that we're told that is not even real is one of the biggest forms of. Now, okay, not to get all into this, people could say, well, Dave, define real, but put that to the side for a moment.
Right.
It's one of the biggest deceptions, in my opinion, and I'll give an example. Money is not really a thing. It is something that we have, in a consensus manner, given value to in order to obtain a form of what we discussed earlier, even usage and trading and all of this. Now, what's interesting is that when people say things like, oh, if someone claims to have seen a spirit or something like this, we can get into the whole, well, what's the difference between a spirit and carbon monoxide or a laser beam or something like this in terms of how one experiences such or knows it's there. But putting that aside, to the side,
or could I even say ectoplasm?
Or yeah, sure, absolutely. A ball, lightning, plasma, you name it. Yeah. But when we see people say, for example, oh, I saw something with the corner of my eye, I saw a spirit, and people say, oh, that's just your imagination, forget about it. Well, hold on a second. That thing, in my opinion, that is called, that person just said, oh, is just your imagination. So for some reason, it's nonsensical in that particular context, but that same, in my opinion, that same method of imagination is giving value to that piece of paper that we call money. So in my thing, which
I
one?
actually literally just posted a picture today of a quarter and a nickel. I'm sorry, of a dime and a nickel on my community section on my YouTube.
Okay.
Okay, it costs 11.5 cents to make a nickel. Okay, money is stupid. Money is nonsense.
Well, it goes back to, actually, if I may take an opportunity to bring up this whole I brought this up to my members before, but this r/, no work or anti-work subreddit on Reddit. There have been some other subreddits other than that particular one that have been started and then shut down, because what you had was, you had people coming together saying, not, I'm sure they're just like with anything else in life, you have your bad apples. There are people that genuinely don't want to contribute and just, leech off of other people, if you
And
will.
people have to understand that they are in every single social,
Oh yeah,
economic, color, any way that humans can be divided and
right.
put them in a box, right? Religious or whatever. There are assholes in all of them.
I would
All
say,
of them.
by definition, it's like a tree branch. You're going to have an odd branch that's not, that's not up to par with the other branches, if you will. And that's not necessarily a bad thing per se. It's more so attempting to assist that branch, but that branch wants to be, needs to be open to being assisted in that particular regard. But sorry, where was I with I lost my train of thought with the with what I was just about to say regarding um pursuing.
You were talking about like manifesting the imagination into reality.
Yes, and this whole concept of, again, the subreddit thing. There we
Yeah,
go.
the Reddit thing, yeah.
You know what's ironic about all this, by the way? It's funny because I bet the people that will be watching and listening to this later, if I ever lose my train of thought again, they'll be like, "Man, I could just rewind it and see where he lost it." But because
Yeah.
we're recording now. But anyways, there have been other subreddits that have followed that train of thought of anti-work, where people are saying, okay, some people, a lot of people are saying, I have, a mortgage paid off, a nice pension, I got a cottage, something like this, the kids are raised, whatever, kids out of the house, but something is missing in here internally. Something is missing. And so when I look, for example, and I see some of these subreddits being shut down, I look and I notice that what was happening was, you had people that were saying, not people of wealth, if you will, in a financial manner or material manner, but them saying to people they didn't know, you need help, you need $2,000-3,000, take a few months, no interest on the loan, I don't even know you, just get back on your feet and then pay me back. And then that started happening more and more. It became a self-reliant system. And then what happened was that then people start to then think, hold on a second, instead of doing a 9 to 5, I can then take the time to, for example, let's just say, listen to Dave and Micah have a conversation. I can take the time to explore, to maybe do some exercise, to read a book, to learn more about myself. And then what you had in some of these subreddits is, you had people with actual money come in, a millionaire say, we'll help all of you. We'll help every single one of you. And no need to pay any of us back. The way you pay us back is by continuing to help others. And what ended up happening was, the whole thing got shut down, because then there would go the need for what we call taxes. There would go the need for the reliance on a hierarchical system. Now, to be clear as well, I'm not trying to advocate for total and complete anarchy as well. I don't claim to have the answer, but at the same time, clearly, what's going on in the current system we have is not working for the masses.
No,
So
it's not. And it's going to collapse, because we know it's going to collapse in the age of Aquarius. We know it is. I mean, just look at them finding Alex Jones, $1.5 billion. Just more of this. Give me more of this. Why not make it a quadrillion dollars? Find him every penny in the universe. Find him for all that. Show how ridiculous this is. I was just thinking to myself, it's just so crazy, because when we get together and we have these conversations, or we like put our minds together and we start to work. Have you heard left brain, right brain?
yep.
You're very left brain. You're very methodical. You're very orderly. You're very, work as far as whereas I'm more of the creative and the kind of right brain who kind of put. I was just thinking together we form a human brain, so that's pretty cool.
That's well, just like a toroid field as well. Just like with, and by the way, I just want, if I could say very quickly, what Micah and I are discussing, the reason we decided to have these conversations going from off the record to recording them is because this can be applied to each and every one of you listening or watching this. And I don't mean this to say, for example, that we are the end all, know all, be all. We are still learning ourselves. But in order to, for example, I am certain that Micah and myself could learn from many of you watching and listening right now. But this idea that, for example, some of you out there can learn from us, we can learn from you, vice versa. It's a never-ending, if you will, toroid field of a cycle that is constantly evolving. So sorry to cut you off, but
no, that's okay. I've got a question for you. So bringing it back into this, let me ask you a question. I have this wild theory that pi and phi are not numbers of this dimension. Okay, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, one could argue it's a universal constant. And I would say, in other words, I would say, not to be, I guess you could say, overly like vague, but first of all, my mind immediately jumps to, particularly when the more I study the science and the academic literature, the more I realize anything and everything is more than likely possible. So first off, with that in mind, I say to myself, who am I to say? But to give you more of a direct answer, if you want my personal opinion, I would say it's a universal constant that transcends, or for lack of a better term, benevolently voids not just this reality, but others too. So yeah.
So would you say, you know how they say that mathematics is the language of the universe?
Right.
Would you not say that consciousness is the language of the universe?
That's a very, dude, honestly, that's a great question. That's something that I would have to think on. I would say that mathematics is not only the language of the universe. I think it is also the way that we perceive the universe. I think what we call numbers is simply mathematics is a quote unquote game of perception, in my opinion. Nothing more, nothing less, if you will. But in terms of consciousness, that's a good question. I wouldn't disagree with you at all. The question I would actually ask to both to you and to the audience is, what is it? Not just that, but is it more than that? Is it, for example, not just the water in the river, but perhaps the structure of the river itself? You see what I mean? I don't honestly, man. That's something that I would probably have to think on for our next recording, and then give you an answer then, because that's a good one. I would need time for that.
No problem. Okay, so what are your thoughts on Neil deGrasse Tyson?
Okay, this is where I'm just going to be very blunt and honest. I have tremendous respect for him, but at the same time, I feel as though a lot of the things he's been saying lately is, I don't know if perhaps there's been some type of, and maybe I'm wrong, some type of egoic influence that has occurred. There are a lot of things that he's been saying seems to contradict the things that he was saying even 3, 4, 5 years ago about the pursuit of exploration. This is where it's unfortunate, where I will say that I've come across an extremely, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, as a test to myself and others, trying to break into this world, this world and community of academia. There's a lot of ego and id tied up with a lot of academics, and that's not, I don't mean that to anyone in particular. I've been very fortunate to deal with and speak with academics who are quite to the contrary, actually, to be clear, both on and off the record. But I think that becomes, I think it goes right back to perhaps internal self-projection with respect to people say, well, okay, I've been in this field for, 50 years or, 5 decades, 4 or 5 decades, or even 30 years. How could someone with far less in terms of time taking the time to learn such come along and suddenly, lack of a better term, put me in my place in my field? Well, my opinion, and I could be wrong, but my humble opinion to that would be, or rebuttal to that respectfully would be, well, it speaks to this idea of perhaps unifying the other fields of academia, but also in a spiritual sense, going back to your work, Micah, understanding that 30 years, 40 years, 50 years is nothing in the grand scheme of the universe. It's absolutely nothing. So if we go back to this idea of perhaps this, this concept of past lives or something of this type, this would be information or knowledge that would have been passed along DNA and information structures, you name it.
Well, we
So
physically know that DNA passes trauma. That trauma can be found in DNA, and that you can do what's called
Right.
generational work on yourself, where you deal with somebody who helps you clear out. Like if you had a great grandmother that was raped and that trauma was passed down, you can have that worked on so that it no longer affects you. There is work on that. That's more on the esoteric side. That's more of the, as the religious called, witchcraft. So things of that nature, I suppose. I don't know. I think it's been doing well so far, what we've been doing. Is there anything you can share about anything for us coming up in the near future, or in the have you spoken to anybody that has shown interest and is going to kick it up a pipeline, or what can you speak to on that?
What I can say is it's already in the works, as we've been talking behind the scenes. But unfortunately, by nature of the work itself, with respects to the type of people that are inquiring, they've asked for complete and utter, you could say, confidentiality. So that's something, unfortunately, that's something that we can't really say to the public per se. If there's anyone from the public that would be interested in, wanting to discuss this further, they're more than welcome to email either yourself or myself, as they know, of course.
Right.
I'll actually have an email set up very shortly, in which will actually be delegated just for that, for what we're doing, you and I, and all of that. But because of the specificities and the requests of the type of people and bodies, and in two cases, world governments that are interested, it goes right under, unfortunately, to a complete NDA type situation.
Yeah.
It becomes, because you see, this is the thing, right? This is sort of like if it goes public, for example, then by definition, and I don't mean this truthfully to the audience, obviously from a business perspective, if you will, this obviously, it's common sense, it's like putting one and one together. But from the perspective of, if this were to be revealed or divulged in a public regard, as a matter of fact, and I'm truthfully, no exaggeration, it may, I'm just watching my words here, it may in fact infringe upon what some nations would consider potentially to be of, dare I say, very carefully, sensitive, or national security, if you will, related manners or regards. And I don't mean that in a dangerous sense whatsoever. But what I mean by that is, if I may elaborate, is that we may in fact be, as we've done so and continue to do, we may be conveying certain information that, if interpreted in a particular way, can then become scientifically calculated or calculatable, and then can be, therefore, again, I guess you could say, applied in very, unfortunately, there are bad people out there with bad intents, that are with consciously bad intents, and then that's when it becomes an issue. So I don't mean to be dodging here, but that's the most I could probably.
No, that's totally fine. I try and word my questions carefully as well too when I ask you.
I
Just so
appreciate
people understand, Dave's also in the UAP community, the UFO community. He does some work in there. I am not a big. It's not that I'm not a fan. I'm kind of walking my own path with what I'm doing, and I'm finding that I don't think anybody's ever applied the cipher that I came up with to all these texts before.
To study, in my opinion, your work is very similar to I don't even want to say UAP. I would even say more so high strangeness, the phenomena, things like this in general. To study your work, in my opinion, is to study life. And I don't mean, I literally mean that, because it can be applied in every facet of life, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's at the negotiating table in business, whether it is because by definition, the underlying information structures and the substrate, if you will, and the energy underneath that substrate contains within it the same fundamental elements and geometrical alignments that just so happen to occur when a handshake is done at the business table, or when, for example, a hug is happening, you're hugging your loved one in bed. It's the same scientific underlying, you could say, framework, if you will.
Right. Well, I think that from my work, what I've come to understand is that the ancients knew of the UAPs. They've been visiting, they've been doing this, but here's the thing. And there's WikiLeaks documents that report on world government meetings with other world governments where they're specifically caught saying, yes, we know there's life elsewhere, but we have our own problems to deal with here. Okay, Robert David Steele, former CIA agent, famously said there are over 100 planets with life that we know of right now. Hopefully, they don't have nuclear weapons. That was what he said. So we know this happens, but let me break down to you guys what happens if they ever go public, which is why they won't yet. But this is what happens, okay? First, understand, okay, that the Jewish religion, okay, the Jewish people do not believe in heaven or hell. They don't. Okay. Now, how you can't believe that you're infinite and how you can't believe that you're going to be judged at the end, I don't know. Speaking as a religious thing, we know that there's karma and that you have to pay it back. But as far as standing in front of God, in front of a judge, if you're separate from God being judged, then God is not infinite because then you are separate from him.
Can I just say, Micah, before you go on to the audience, this
Yeah.
is the part where actually I even sit back and I listen to what Micah has to say. So please.
Okay. Okay. So you have to understand is that if you're being judged, you are now separate from God. Okay. We know space and time is an illusion on this planet. It only moves forward. But we do know that everything has happened simultaneously. Okay. Everything is happening simultaneously. Also, when you get to higher dimensions, okay, time is more malleable. You can go back in time. This is why I talk about people who have to come back and reincarnate and do life over again because they killed themselves or for whatever other reason they still have lessons to learn. Your next life could be in the past. Okay. And that's just an example. But what I'm basically saying is that the Jewish people don't believe in heaven or hell. Okay. So that's strange to begin with. Okay. The Christian people, okay, believe that demons are aliens. Any Christian that you will find will tell you that any alien, benevolent or good, is a demon. Okay. That's what they believe in. Okay. So now imagine for a second that an alien comes down and lands in Mar-a-Lago and Donald Trump puts him on TV. All right. Imagine that for a second. Okay. All the Christians will call it the apocalypse. Okay. The beginning of Revelation. Now, I've demystified Revelation with astrotheology before, but that's what they basically will do. Okay. I'm not so sure what the Muslims do. The word jinn comes to mind. But basically, you have your three major religions. Okay. And then you have other people like, the Chinese, the Hindus. You have thousands and thousands of religions, but the three mainstream ones, okay, what would happen if an alien got on TV? Okay, the Mar-a-Lago example. Okay, the Christians would scream that it's the apocalypse. They would be uncontrollable. Okay, they would be crying, shaking. They'd be screaming at people to repent. It would be like you randomly see crazy people do sometimes. That would be everywhere. Okay.
There are
And
people in world governments, by the way, that don't want a lot of this stuff out. So a lot of the things we work on privately with
right.
what we're doing jointly with SALT and all that stuff because of the evangelical belief.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But you also have to understand too, is that when it comes to my work, when it comes to when it comes to my work, and you're talking about these benevolent beings, we know they exist. We know they exist. I've spoken on this channel before about Dicinian dye, okay, which is one, if not the most illegal substance on earth. You can't find anything about it on the internet, and anything you will find on the internet about it is nonsense. Okay, it's garbage. Okay, you will not find anything that's on the Brave browser. That's I don't know, Dave. Maybe you're linked into the deep web and you can buy some. I don't know, but what you do, okay, what they found was during Vietnam. Okay, the infrared goggles used to be red, and they used to be coated with this, and so many of these soldiers would come back and they reported that they saw demons because of this Dicinian dye. So what did the military do? They changed it from red to green. Suddenly that went away. They stopped coding it. Okay. So we do know that there are entities. Now I had Nate Gillis. I think I had him on with you, the demonologist. with the UFO. Yeah, I did, and he brought his research into it. There are benevolent beings and there are malevolent beings, okay, that are out there, okay, but
Yep.
it would be uncontrollable, okay, it would be uncontrollable. But as far as my work goes, when I've pointed to um, the Egyptians, the age of Taurus, the Jews, the age of Aries, the Christians, the age of Pisces, we're in Aquarius right now. They're trying to merge religions, okay, so releasing the UFO might just be in due time, or releasing these aliens might be in due time. So I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm just trying to. I don't.
Well, it speaks well. Here's the thing. To your point. There have been, see, this is what becomes a dilemma even for myself personally, that I don't claim to have the answer to. But you have some ideologies that speak to this idea that, people, for example, in general, and I want the people listening right now to hear it in this particular regard. I'm wording it this way on purpose, where you have some people that think, well, the masses are like children. They like being told what to do. You have to tell them what to do. They like being, led to a particular point, even if they don't know where that point is leading them to. They just like the fact that, they like being told what to do. Now, one can make from multiple angles, scientifically, neurologically, psychologically, ontologically, one can make very, very epigenetically, sociologically, one can make very strong cases for such. But then you also have the other end of things where people say, well, for as many people as there are that would like to be told what to do, there are, say, 2 out of every 10 people that actually like going and creating their own beaten path, which speaks to, again, this idea of branching off, fractality, and things like this, which is why, for example, let's take even the definition, or not the definition, the general understanding of podcasting, or, listening to a YouTube video or watching a YouTube video. It is not thousands of people speaking to one person or 2 people. It is 1 or 2 people, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, speaking to thousands, if not many, many millions. And I'm
So
not
the
saying either
people who
way
are
is right nor wrong.
the people who are on their beaten path. You can think about it in like a math equation in a sense. It's basically they're the remainder.
Right.
They're
Right.
the remainder. They're a causality. They're a natural reaction to this. You can call them an old soul. You can call them woke, in the true sense, awake. You can call them whatever you want. But
I couldn't agree more. Yep. And by the way, just to be clear, I'm not trying to say that, for example, the ones speaking and or the ones listening, regardless of how many there are in terms of a popular volume or population, I'm not saying it is good or bad. What I'm saying is that it perhaps may speak to the various, not 1 or 2 sides, but to the perhaps infinite sides or infinite angles of
mhm.
perspective. So, for example, there may be somebody listening to you and I right now that may say, hold on a second, I want to go start my own podcast because Dave and Micah touched on something that, because they're so focused on what they're currently doing now, maybe they don't have the time to touch on it. And then that person will go start a show. And the next thing you know, maybe, 6 months, 12 months go by. You and I, Micah, we hear about that person and then reach out to them. And then we do a show with them. And then by definition, that ripple effect of small little fractal individuals brings together the remainder, like you just said, by
Right.
definition.
Absolutely. Well, and I want to be honest with you guys, everybody who's listening on Dave's platform and on mine. I want to be honest with you guys. At no point do either Dave or I claim to have all the answers. Okay, I am not a fucking guru. Okay,
Right,
I
right.
know that what I have and what I am teaching you guys is the truth, and it's seriously mind blowing stuff. But I am not. I tell people I don't have followers. Okay, I have supporters, and that's what I want. Okay, because even the word fan is short for fanatic, and I don't need any of those. Okay, so all I'm saying is that all I'm trying to do, all Dave's trying to do, is get your mind open. Just wake up, find your own answers. The one thing I will tell you this is that when people wake up, okay, they have this zest for life, this insane zest for life, for knowledge, for understanding. When you first start going down rabbit holes and you're just digging through all of them, that's how you know. That feeling that you get is the feeling that me and Dave do when we're working towards something. Okay, it's just endless grit, it's endless determination to learn, do this, do that. Okay, the problem is, okay, is that in the conspiracy world, you have to know when to pull out of a rabbit hole and when you've gone too far deep. Okay. And a lot of people do not know that. And that's what my book series basically teaches is I talk about all the rabbit holes, okay, that are real that you guys have not heard about. But I do not touch the ones that are so popular that there's so much disinformation back and forth you can't even tell. I don't touch popular ones, you know?
Well, to tell you to add to your point, it speaks to this. To your point, it's one can go down that rabbit hole, and one can keep going. There comes a point where it speaks to this idea of the macro and the micro again, the zooming in and the zooming out. One has to know, no pun intended, when to pull out, essentially, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
and to essentially realize, literally, when, for example, asking oneself, okay, what do I attain? And I'm not saying to stop going down rabbit holes, quite the contrary, but I'm also saying, to Micah's point as well, there needs to come a point where perhaps a personal line should or would be drawn, because not just for spiritual and mental purposes, if you will. And that's why I say, for example, everyone's got different limits. Some people can handle certain things more so than others, mentally, spiritually, you name it. But there comes a point where it's like, all right, the more one takes a deep dive into the deep dive they already jumped into, the more one realizes that they're heading back to the same, perhaps, source in which every other field or angle will lead them to. So it eventually comes to the point where it speaks to this unification, in my opinion, this understanding of I guess you could say, ascertaining the veracity of a unification of, okay, we've dived into this. That is not to say just because we stopped that we're done with it, not at all. But we've dived into this granular area. Maybe it's time to put it on the shelf, metaphorically or literally, head somewhere else. And then by learning somewhere else, that can then be applied to what you put on the shelf.
Yes. So, Dave, I want to bring
Right.
you back to a question that I kind of had, because I read Hawking's book the other day,
Sure.
Brief History of Time, I think it was called. Let me ask you a question. So, with electron microscopes, right, and basically understanding what a quark is, right?
Yep.
It almost goes without saying that that's just as far as we are right now, but that there's going to be some kind of quantum telescopics that's going to allow us to find the breakdown of what makes up a quark. And then it's going to go further, further, further down until we hit the Planck level. There's so much we don't know.
I could not agree with you more anymore. You hit the nail on the head. As a matter of fact, what I can say is that you're based on what I've experienced and where I've been, if you will, physically, as what I'm doing now with traveling in the States and all. Yeah, it's been done. As a matter, which comes to a point where it's like, again, a small group of individuals cracked this many decades ago, and essentially said, okay, how are we going to lay this out, if at all, to the masses? Now, that's part of what I'm trying to do and working with Micah as well, in accelerating the dissemination of that.
Now, is there a financial incentive, for example, right? Let's just say we discover mini quarks, but it turns quantum physics or physics on its head completely. It completely destroys it. Is there a financial incentive to bury it so that you don't discredit everything that's been done so far?
Honestly, from what I've seen, and from what I've been told, and all of that, there are financial incentives from every angle. The question is, which one is going to come out on top? There's a financial incentive to bury everything right now. There's a financial incentive to actually continue to look into things. There's another financial incentive from various elements to bring some of this public. Because if some of this comes public, we can then progress our humanity as a species while still still profiting financially. But my hope is to ensure that with what we're doing at SALT and otherwise is to help redistribute some of that more appropriately to the masses. But to your point, brother, yeah, no, I don't mean to be overly vague, but I'd say there's an incentive from all over the place. It just depends on who's going to come out on top. Just going back to like what we were saying almost an hour ago about everyone's a hypocrite. The question is, how conscious are we of it?
Right, because we do know that the Museum of Natural History has buried these like 8-foot, 10-foot skeletons, and they've just made them disappear, even though they were supposed to be cataloged and put out. So we know there are incentives. So my question is, Do you see a malevolent side if we discover like a new particle?
Honestly, I hate to be like this, yes, but it's already been here, so we already know what to deal with and how to hopefully deal with that malevolent angle. Yeah,
And that's
it's
where I think the light system comes in, to be honest with you. I would suggest that you look it up too, Dave. I am going to talk about it in my last book, but do your research into the light system.
absolutely. Absolutely. Actually, in about, unfortunately, just to give you a heads up, in about 2-3 minutes, I do have to jet. But
no, me too. It's okay.
Okay, perfect. Did you want to just end it here and we'll do another one?
Yeah, let's end it here. So I'm not even going to tell people where to find me because this is going up on my channel, and you don't have to do that either because this is going up on whenever
everyone,
you have it up.
Right, everyone already, yeah, everyone.
So we just wanted to give you guys a little heads up into what we're doing. I could promise you this, okay? I know Dave very well. Dave knows me very well. Our intentions are pure. When we tell you we can't tell you something, it is not because we hold power over you for any other reason. It is just that these are eggshells that you have to walk on when you hit the kind of information that we're trying to disseminate. Okay,
It's also
to certain people.
I couldn't agree with you anymore. And also the people in which may want some of this stuff to come out. Again, unfortunately, because of how and where in some cases this information is being held, one of the few ways it could be done is via conduits, via, for example, I guess you could say, methodologies and apparatuses like not just Micah and myself. There are many others out there as well.
Right.
It's just under different forms of you could say, everyone has different views on how it should be disseminated, and I'm not saying those views are right nor wrong. Micah and myself are just trying to take a very benevolent angle, although in fairness and transparency, for the time being, I guess one could argue very strongly a secretive angle, but that the intent is to not make it secretive in the long run. So
right. I mean, you guys have to understand is that all the ancient societies, okay, all worship the sun. Okay. Now the Jews also worship Saturn, and there's other worship too. But I don't even talk about the gods of the Greeks and the Romans. Not even talk about that, even though that goes to Jupiter, Zeus, Hail, Zeus, hey, Zeus, Jesus. I can do this all day.
right.
But basically, what I'm just trying to say is that what I teach is the unmasking of everybody that had this masked. And maybe they had it masked because it wasn't for everybody. You know, the Bible does talk about tossing pearls in front of swine, to be honest with you, you know, if you think about it. But I am just basically unveiling everything that had to be encoded. I'm encoding it. And that's what I'm doing in my book series. Okay.
Well, brother, I want to thank you so much for coming on my show. And I mean, this is, you know, dude, it's become a joint thing. So it doesn't, I just want to thank you for actually even initiating this, because I can't take the credit when it was Micah who said, hey everyone, we should get this going. But yes. I do have to get going, unfortunately, but I want to thank you so much, man, and to the audience as well. And we'll catch everyone next time.
Sounds good. Talk to you guys later.